would you give Gallifrey to the Cybermen?
You're about to have much bigger things to think about.
Tonight, I want to take you back to a show that once felt indestructible. A show that could survive bad effects, wild tonal swings, rubber monsters, impossible plots, and even long years off the air, because at its heart, Doctor Who always knew exactly what it was. It was strange, clever, melancholy, hopeful, a little frightening, and deeply human. It was about a wanderer with no throne, no destiny, and no special bloodline that mattered more than anyone else's. Just a mad traveler in a box, choosing kindness over cruelty again and again. And then one night, Doctor Who looked into the mirror, rewrote its own face, and called that reinvention. For some fans, it was bold. For others, it was overdue. But for a huge part of the audience, one scene didn't just change the lore, it broke the emotional contract. This is the scene that ended Doctor Who forever. By the time we reach that scene, the pieces are already in place. The episode is The Timeless Children, first broadcast on the 1st of March 2020, written by Chris Chibnall and directed by Jamie Magnus Stone. Jodie Whittaker is the Doctor. Bradley Walsh, Tosin Cole, and Mandip Gill are still aboard as Graham, Ryan, and Yaz. Sacha Dhawan, giving absolutely everything he has, is the Master. On paper, that is a strong lineup. In isolated moments, it still works. Whittaker has warmth. Dhawan has chaos. Walsh brings gravity. Even people who disliked this era often admit that the cast was never the real problem. The trouble was not the actors, it was what the story wanted them to carry. And that matters, because Doctor Who had survived risky casting before. Older fans had watched Hartnell turn into Troughton, Troughton into Pertwee, Tom Baker into Davison, and every impossible transition after that. The show's history is built on change. Reinvention is not a betrayal of Doctor Who. It is the engine that keeps Doctor Who alive. That is why the argument around this era was never as simple as fans hate change. Doctor Who fans love change when it still feels like Doctor Who. The issue is not whether the myth can move. The issue is whether the movement reveals something richer, or whether it empties the character out. To understand why The Timeless Children landed so badly for so many people, you have to understand what the Doctor represented before Chris Chibnall reached for the red pen. For decades, the Doctor was compelling precisely because the character was important in the wrong way. Not because they were chosen by the universe, but because they refused to stay ordinary. They were a runaway, a meddler, a fool with impossible courage. The Doctor mattered because of decisions, not birthright. Because of mercy, not hidden supremacy. Because whenever power told them to kneel, they preferred to run, improvise, and help whoever was standing nearest to the fire. In classic Who, in Russell T Davies' revival, and even in Stephen Moffat's most myth-heavy years, the Doctor's legend kept growing, but the core remained recognizable. This was a person who became extraordinary through action. That is why the older mythology worked. Gallifrey gave the Doctor a home, but not a crown. The Time Lords gave the Doctor a people, but not a divine purpose. Even when the show hinted at ancient mysteries, it usually understood the golden rule. Mystery is only powerful when it leaves room for the audience to dream. Andrew Cartmel, one of the classic era's most influential script editors, once wanted to deepen the Doctor's aura without pinning everything down too tightly. There was always a sense that the Doctor might be more than we knew, but not because the universe had stamped them as the source code of creation. The magic was in the uncertainty. Chris Chibnall clearly wanted to do something huge. He has said the Timeless Child twist was planned from the start of his tenure and was designed to open up the mythology to more stories. I do not think that instinct was malicious. I do not even think it was foolish in theory. Doctor Who has always been a show where one mad idea can revive the whole machine. If you are taking over a 60-year-old institution, the temptation to leave your own mark must be overwhelming. And, to be fair, Chibnall was not wrong about one thing. By 2018, Doctor Who did need a jolt. Peter Capaldi had left. The show had shed viewers. The first female Doctor was arriving under an absurd amount of cultural pressure. Chibnall likely believed he needed a grand mythic gesture, something that would stamp this era into history and make the Doctor mysterious again. But that was the first miscalculation. The Doctor did not need more mystery in the abstract. The Doctor needed better drama. Mystery is not a substitute for character. Revealing a buried secret is not the same as deepening a soul. Chibnall built an entire arc around the question of the Timeless Child, but when the answer finally came, it did not make the Doctor more tragic, more dangerous, or more emotionally legible. It made the Doctor feel less earned, less grounded, less like the person older fans had followed for decades. So let us talk about the scene itself. The Master traps the Doctor in the Matrix, Gallifrey's repository of knowledge, and delivers one of the longest, densest exposition dumps in modern Doctor Who. We learn that long before the Time Lords existed as we knew them, a Gallifreyan explorer named Tectune found a mysterious child near a gateway to another universe. That child could regenerate. Tectune studied the child, exploited that power, spliced it into Gallifreyan biology, and built Time Lord society on the back of that theft. Then comes the twist. The child was the Doctor. Not just another lost figure from ancient history, not some separate mythic being, the Doctor. In one stroke, the Doctor is no longer simply a Time Lord who rejected Time Lord society. The Doctor becomes the hidden origin of Time Lord power itself. Regeneration, the most iconic biological fact of the series, no longer belongs to the Doctor's people in any meaningful ancestral sense. It belongs to the Doctor first. Hartnell is no longer the beginning in any clean emotional way, because there were secret incarnations before him, secret erased lives, secret service to the division, secret buried history beneath the history fans had already invested in. The show does not just add a hidden room to the house, it informs you the foundations were poured by somebody else wearing the same face. And if you are wondering why so many people recoiled, it is not because Doctor Who canon is sacred scripture. Doctor Who canon has always been gloriously messy. Contradictions, retcons, alternate explanations, forgotten details, all of that is part of the furniture. Stephen Moffat even defended the twist, arguing that Doctor Who has never fit neatly and never will. He is right, to a point. Canon flexibility is not the issue. The problem is emotional architecture. The Timeless Child reveal does not merely contradict trivia. It reframes the central character from a wandering outsider into the source of the empire they once fled. It turns a self-made figure into inherited cosmic importance. It replaces romance with admin. Instead of widening the Doctor's soul, it widens the filing cabinet. Worse, it does all of this in the least dramatically satisfying way possible. The Doctor is largely passive during the revelation. The Master narrates, the Matrix shows images. The audience is instructed, not devastated. There is no earned, personal confrontation between who the Doctor was and who the Doctor becomes. There's just information. A mountain of lore poured onto the viewer's head and sold as emotional impact. Even critics who were open to the ambition often complained about the episode's crushing amount of exposition. The Guardian called the reveal baffling and portentous rather than profound. Radio Times was far harsher, calling the whole thing an overblown gush of nonsense. Rotten Tomatoes recorded a respectable critic score for the episode, but the broader audience split around this era was impossible to ignore. And that split is where the title of this video starts to make sense. Because no, the Timeless Children did not literally take Doctor Who off the air. The BBC is still making Doctor Who, and the franchise remains alive. But for many viewers, this was the moment the old trust died. The ratings tell part of that story. The episode drew 3.78 million overnight viewers in the UK and 4.69 million officially, making it the lowest rated episode of the revived series at that point. Series 12 averaged 5.4 million viewers, the lowest of the modern revival up to then. That decline did not begin with this one scene. It had been building. But this scene became the perfect symbol of why people were drifting away. Not because it was controversial in a healthy way, but because it made many longtime viewers feel the show no longer understood why they loved it. That is also why the backlash was so complicated. Some criticism was ugly, shallow, and driven by culture war nonsense. Jodie Whittaker should never have been made to carry that. She was not the problem, and it is important to say that clearly. But once you strip away the bad faith noise, there was still a genuine creative revolt underneath it. Fans were not just angry because a thing changed, they were angry because the change felt spiritually wrong. The BBC Complaints Department even issued a statement defending the creative freedom behind the reveal, which tells you how loud the response became. And when a franchise starts needing official reassurance that its own past still counts, something deeper than ordinary fandom grumbling is happening. What made the pain worse was the nostalgia factor. Older Doctor Who fans had already lived through cancellation once. They knew what it felt like to watch the public drift away from something they adored. The 2005 revival mattered because it restored not only the show, but the feeling of the show. Russell T Davies understood that instantly. He brought the Doctor back as lonely, funny, dangerous, and heartbreakingly kind. Even when the revival made the Doctor larger than life, it kept bringing the character back to ordinary rooms, ordinary people, ordinary grief. Chibnall's reveal moved in the opposite direction. It did not return the Doctor to mystery. It pushed the Doctor into abstraction, into prehistory, into cosmic paperwork, into a chosen one frame the series had never truly needed. Even people defending the twist often defended the idea more than the execution. Television is judged in scenes, performances, pacing, memory. And the scene most people remember is the Master unloading continuity grenades while the Doctor simply absorbs the damage. That is the opposite of how Doctor Who usually wins your heart. Then, there is the question of what happened to the people involved. Chris Chibnall and Jodie Whittaker were confirmed to leave in 2022, ending their tenure together after 3 specials. Since then, Whittaker has moved into darker dramatic material, leading Netflix's Toxic Town and taking major roles in projects like ITV's Frauds. Mandip Gill went on to star in the dystopian crime drama Curfew. Tosin Cole continued building a strong career through Supercell and the upcoming film adaptation of Children of Blood and Bone. Bradley Walsh never exactly vanished into the time vortex. He remained one of Britain's most familiar television faces through The Chase and Gladiators. Chibnall himself moved on to new work, including major adaptations such as Death at the White Hart and Agatha Christie's Seven Dials. In other words, the career survived. The stain was not professional ruin. It was legacy. And legacy is what this scene poisoned. Not permanently for every fan, not universally, and not beyond repair, but enough to matter. Russell T. Davies has since said he will not unwrite Chibnall's work, which means the franchise has chosen coexistence over erasure. That is probably the honorable choice. But it also means the timeless child reveal remains lodged inside the show like shrapnel. Later eras can route around it, soften it, reinterpret it, bury it beneath better storytelling. What they cannot do is pretend that the break in trust never happened. So when I say this was the scene that ended Doctor Who forever, I do not mean the BBC rolled credits on the franchise and locked the TARDIS in a museum. I mean something sadder than cancellation. I mean the end of a particular faith. The end of the assumption that Doctor Who, no matter how odd it became, still understood the soul of its own hero. Before this, fans could disagree wildly about eras, companions, and showrunners, and still feel they were arguing inside the same cathedral. After this, a lot of people felt like the building had been renovated into an airport lounge. And that is why this scene still hurts. Because Doctor Who was never supposed to need the Doctor to be the first, the secret, the source, the chosen one behind everything. The Doctor was inspiring because they ran away, because they interfered, because they learned, because they failed, grieved, loved, and kept going. Strip away the police box, the scarf, the speechifying, the music, the monsters, and that was the beating heart. The timeless child reveal did not destroy every possible future for Doctor Who, but it did wound that heart. It mistook scale for meaning. It confused revelation with depth. And in trying to make the Doctor more important than ever, it made the character feel smaller. Not to the universe, to us. Look closely at how the episode stages its own apocalypse, and you can see the larger problem. Gallifrey is already destroyed off-screen. The Cybermen are reduced to decorative menace. The companions are split off into survival business that feels imported from another script. Ashad, who had the potential to become one of the era's most unsettling villains, is casually disposed of so the Master can move the plot along. Then the show unveils the Cybermasters, an image that should have been the stuff of childhood nightmares, a fusion of two of Doctor Who's greatest horrors, and somehow even that cannot breathe because the episode is too busy explaining its own mythology. Everything is subordinated to the twist. Everything bends the knee to exposition. A finale that should feel like a symphony instead sounds like a PowerPoint with explosions. That matters because great Doctor Who finales usually understand one simple principle. Spectacle must cash out emotionally. Think of Doomsday. Think of the parting of the waves. Think of World Enough and Time and the Doctor Falls. Even when those stories go huge, they always come back to grief, sacrifice, fear, and choice. Rose is trapped in another world. The Ninth Doctor gives up his life to save someone he loves. Bill is horrifically converted. The 12th Doctor decides where he stands and where he falls. You remember the emotion first and the lore second. The Timeless Children reverses that order. It gives you the lore first, then asks you to assume the emotion will follow. For a lot of viewers, it never did. And that is why the nostalgia angle is not sentimental indulgence. It is central to the argument. Older viewers did not hold Doctor Who dear because every era was flawless. Quite the opposite. They loved it because beneath every wobble there was a recognizable spirit. Hartnell's alien severity, softening into compassion. Troughton's clown-hiding steel, Pertwee's authority, Tom Baker's dangerous joy, McCoy's mystery, Eccleston's war-scarred sorrow, Tennant's romantic vanity, Smith's old soul inside a young face, Capaldi's hard-earned mercy. Those doctors were all different, but each still felt like another room in the same house. The Timeless Child reveal did not feel like a new room. It felt like discovering the architect had rewritten the map and expected applause for the audacity. There is another reason the scene stung, and fans do not always admit it out loud because it sounds almost childish until you say it plainly. William Hartnell mattered. He mattered beyond chronology. He mattered symbolically. For generations, Hartnell's Doctor was not just the first face on screen, but the emotional point of origin. The grumpy old man who stole the show opened the doors of the TARDIS and began this impossible journey. By placing countless forgotten incarnations before him, the series did not erase Hartnell from history, but it did shift his meaning. Suddenly, he was not the beginning of the character in the way viewers had felt for decades. He became an afterimage of an older secret. For some fans, that did not feel like expansion. It felt like demotion. That is why you saw such a sharp split in the public reaction. Some critics admired the ambition. Rotten Tomatoes still lists the episode with a positive critic score, and not everyone hated the reveal. Entertainment Weekly called it bold. Stephen Moffat defended it. Some fans honestly enjoyed the sense of new possibility, but the wider audience trend was colder. Series 12 as a whole sat at a low audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, and the UK ratings never suggested a show surging with renewed cultural momentum. The data does not prove that one twist alone caused that. It would be dishonest to pretend it does. What it does show is that the revelation arrived at a moment when the audience's patience was already fragile. Instead of healing that distance, it crystallized it. And maybe the cruelest part is that there was a version of this idea that might have worked. Imagine if the Timeless Child had been someone else, someone the Doctor had failed, or forgotten, or helped create through negligence. Imagine if the Master had been the child, which would have deepened his rage and tied his broken identity to something tragic rather than merely theatrical. Imagine if the secret had been dramatized through choices rather than delivered as archived footage. Imagine if the Doctor had to reject cosmic importance instead of passively receiving it. There were roads here that could have led somewhere haunting. The problem is not that Doctor Who touched forbidden material. The problem is that it touched it clumsily. You can also feel the damage in how often later conversations about Jodie Whittaker's era stop being about Jodie Whittaker. That should not happen. She made history as the first woman to lead the series, and she had the impossible job of carrying both genuine excitement and a grotesque amount of bad faith hostility. Over time, she has spoken about the pressure that came with being treated as more than one actor, as though any failure would be held against every woman who might come after her. That burden was unfair. And yet, the Timeless Child discourse often swallowed her actual performance whole. Instead of discussing what Whittaker brought to the role, people fought over a lore bomb she did not write. That is one of the lasting injuries of this era. A talented actor's legacy became inseparable from a twist many viewers resented. The companions suffered too, in a quieter way. Graham was the one character who consistently felt finished enough to touch people. Ryan had moments of vulnerability. Yaz survived the longest, but often seemed to be waiting for the script to decide who she was. When the show finally pushed Yaz closer to the Doctor emotionally, it was almost too late. The timeless child reveal demanded that viewers process the Doctor as a shattered myth, while the companions themselves remained only partially formed. So the human bridge between audience and revelation was weak. Once again, the script asked fans to care about information more than relationships, and Doctor Who has rarely prospered when it makes that trade. Fan culture after the episode reflected all of this confusion. Some people argued that Doctor Who had always rewritten itself, and this was no different. Others said the reveal transformed the Doctor into a quasi-divine chosen one, and cheapened decades of stories built on agency and rebellion. Some simply thought the episode was boring, which might be the deadliest criticism of all. You can survive outrage. You can survive disagreement. Doctor Who has fed on both for 60 years. Boredom is harder to survive because boredom is where attachment goes to die. And so the scene endures not simply because it changed continuity, but because it captured a broader exhaustion. Viewers were tired of speeches that did not quite land, mysteries that kept substituting for characterization, companions treated like furniture, and finales that announced importance instead of earning it. The timeless child reveal became the emblem of that fatigue, a single image for a deeper frustration, a bright, loud symbol of a show that, for one era, stopped trusting the smaller truths that had made it immortal in the first place. For many older viewers still,